Hi, and welcome back to Border City Living. Tonight I'm going to discuss a bit about the city that I live in. Now, as some of you know or have maybe heard me discuss before, I'm not originally from this city. I was born and raised just outside of London, Ontario, Canada. And when I was going to college, I moved to Windsor to start college here, and I haven't left. So I moved to Windsor in 1999, and I began college here. And then about a year and a half after, about a year and a half after I moved here, I was dating my husband. So he's obviously the reason why I stayed. I'm going to talk about Windsor in general, but first I'm just going to talk about what it was like for me to move from a very small town to the city. So when I first decided to go to college, I actually went to London for a year first. So I went with friends of mine from high school. I lived with a girl that I went to high school with and some other girls. So I moved to London and I took my first year of college there. Kitty. I took my first year of college there, and while I was in college there, I didn't really feel like I lived in London, which sounds silly, but I went to school there from Monday to Friday, but I spent every weekend back in my hometown. So I never really immersed myself in living in a city because, you know, even where the college was situated in that city, I could quickly enter the city and quickly leave the city because it was close to the road I needed to take back home. So I never really sunk into living there. But then I decided to come to Windsor for college, and whilst I was trying to change schools, my mom and my stepdad at the time were deciding to move down this way because he was working in this area with construction. And he was a lead foreman of a major job that was going on here, and he knew that there was going to be work in the future. So they were trying to move down here. I decided I needed a change in my life, and I wanted to push myself outside my boundaries. So I moved to Windsor. So in August of 1999, I moved here. And I had been here once before in terms of like looking for a place to live with my mom. And I kind of went full steam ahead. I registered for school. I wasn't able to transfer any of my credits from the same type of program from one school to the next. So I was starting from scratch essentially in school. But moving to the city proved to be quite an experience for me. So I moved to Windsor, like I said, and within a week of living here, I decided that I needed to find a job. But I wanted to navigate myself around the city a little bit because where I was living, I was renting a room in a home of some people. So I didn't really experience the city really, in the sense that I'd never really been downtown. I'd only been out to the south end of the city where the college was, and that's kind of where I was living at the time. So I decided to get on the bus and take the bus downtown by myself and kind of experience that. It sounds naive, it sounds probably funny, but when we got to a certain part of the city and I could see the skyline of the waterfront, I was blown away. Again, it sounds dramatic, it sounds silly, but when you come from a town of 3,400 people, where it takes maybe 30 minutes from walk from one end of the city to their town to the other, the magnitude of Detroit's skyline is enormous. I had never traveled as a kid down this way. I'd never traveled to a large city other than Toronto. So it was interesting for me because, again, as naive as I was, driving downtown in Windsor, when you get to a certain point, it almost looks like the downtown of Windsor is enormous. But as you get to the actual waterfront, you see that Windsor is quite flat and not a lot of major buildings in our downtown area. But of course, when you look at the skyline of Detroit, and if any of you know it, it's massive and it's extensive. So it was definitely overwhelming for me, but exciting, because I kept telling myself in high school that what I wanted more than anything, was to work at a law office and to live in a major city, in a big city. Now, Windsor's not a major city, but it is a big city in comparison to, like I said, where I lived. So I definitely felt like I was taking that step towards that at that point. So I got here, I got situated, I kind of acclimated myself to the city. I figured out bus routes, which I'd never had to do in my life, and figured out how to get to the grocery store from where I was living, figured out how to get to the mall, back and forth to the school. And then I got a job, very close to where I lived, down the street, actually. I could walk there and back, no problem. So, like I said, moving to the city, I definitely had some major differences come up for me that I wasn't thinking about, because it had never been anything that needed to be a thought of mine, I guess. So coming from a small community, I obviously had very little exposure to other ethnicities, other, just cultural differences. And, there's even a difference in how people are in the city versus in a small town. Just how they go about their day-to-day life. And it might not seem drastic to some people, but to me, I definitely noticed a different set of core values almost in a small town than into the city. So now I'll just briefly kind of talk about Windsor and some highlights about the city itself. In today's day and age, Windsor is quite attached to the auto industry. Our Chrysler, actually the Fiat Chrysler headquarters, or the Chrysler headquarters for Canada, is actually here in Windsor along our riverfront. And from obviously our riverfront, we can see across to Detroit and see the massive GM buildings. So there's a huge tie between the auto industry in the US and here. We not only are some vehicles built here in Windsor, but also a lot of parts are built, or machinery is created to create the cars in the US. So we're heavily tied to that. So we were greatly affected by the downward turn of the economy in 2008. Our city was very, very, very affected by that, and myself and my husband extremely affected by that, as he was laid off from his manufacturing job where he supplies parts to Chrysler and Ford and so on. So again, we're very tied to, we had, Ford dealerships. The Chrysler minivan has always been built, I believe, in Windsor. We had General Motors as well. So we've had a lot of vehicles built here in our city. We no longer, I believe, have GM, but we still have Ford and Chrysler. And Chrysler actually just hired a whole bunch of people, so that was nice for our economy in here in Windsor. Windsor has a college, St. Clair College, and it has a university, University of Windsor. Both of them have a significant amount of employees that work there, and they both are actually continuing to expand a lot at this point. So Also in Windsor, it has a casino. It is actually Caesars affiliated, so we have Caesars Windsor here. It is again on our waterfront, and it draws a lot of big name acts, and that's wonderful for our city. We also, obviously, the gambling that comes along with that. So other things that we're tied to would be that aren't relevant today, but still provide money in our economy, is whiskey. Windsor is the home of Hiram Walker. It's no longer called Hiram Walker, I believe, but basically it is a whiskey distillery, and it is in the Walkerville area of our city. It's been around since the 1850s, I believe, and it's currently owned by, I believe, I don't know how to pronounce it, is it Pernod Ricard? So like all, there's rum and everything that's made there now at this point. So but when it was Hiram Walker, way back in the day, it was tied to rum running and the mob. Actually, last summer I went on a rum running tour in our city, and it was awesome. It was so much fun, but it gave a very rich history of the rum running and how it was kind of how it played out and whatnot. So that is also an integral part of this area. And there's a large French-Canadian history here. Actually, my husband's fluent in French, and my son is going to French immersion school, which is, dual, like he's learning English and French. And myself, I'm actually enrolled back at St. Clair College taking some French classes now. We also have a large salt mine here. We're connected to the Great Lakes, and we are actually technically south of the United States. So Windsor is actually south of Detroit. So fun little fact there that people don't realize is that we're actually the most southern city in Canada, and we are lower technically than Detroit is. So it's kind of an interesting little fact. So I think that that's all I have tonight to share, but if you have any questions or anything you'd like me to elaborate on, I definitely can. It's a wonderful city that I live in. There's lots of other things that the city has to offer, but those are the main things, the positive things, I will say, about our city and our community. Thanks for watching.
And fun.